Masechet Gittin Daf Tet. We are comparing Gittin Nashim to Gittin Shichrure Avadim. We're about to see the Mishnah on this daf that relates to this law, but we already introduced it yesterday, and we saw that just like with someone, a messenger who brings a get Nashim has to say Befanai Nichtav Befanai Nichtam, so too a messenger who is bringing a get Shichrure Avadim, a get to say that this a slave goes free, has to say the same formula, and that is sufficient. Whereas with a contract, a deed for financial matters, that is not sufficient to say it was written in front of me. There you have to actually ratify the signatures. And so now we talked about a case where it has both together. Someone brings a deed, a contract, and it says a document, and it says Atzmecha un chasai kenuyin lecha, yourself, the slave, and my property is given over to you. It's all said in one statement. So then we split it in half, and we say, well, if he goes free. That word applies just with Befanai Nichtam Befanai Nichtam. However, the rest of the property the signatures have to be ratified first before the slave can acquire the property. So everybody agreed in that case because it's two separate words that the laws apply separately. The question is, what if it's in one phrase? Kol nechasai kenuyin lecha. Then what do we do? And Abaye said it's all or nothing. And first he said all, then he changed his mind and he said nothing. All right, so you cannot split the application. It goes all one word. So in the end he said, since he does not get the money, because he has to ratify signature for that, then he does not get anything, and he in fact does not go free. However, according to Rava, you can split the difference, and the part of it, the sense of it that applies to the money will not go, because that needs ratification, but the sense of it that everything I have is given to you, and includes his body, so regarding his own freedom, that does apply, and he goes free. All right, and so we call that palginan dibura. So that's what we're up to. Amar le Rav Ada bar Matana Rava keman keRabbi Shimon damar palginan dibura. Rava, the Amora, is following the opinion of Rabbi Shimon the Tana, who says we can divide a statement, right? It's actually just one statement. If it's two words, then everyone agreed you can divide it. But here it's only one phrase, and yet we can divide it, the application, the sense of it that applies to money, no good. The sense of it applies to his freedom, personal freedom, that does go, right? And so Rabbi Shimon says something similar. Let's see what he says. This is a Mishnah in Masechet Pe'ah. Ditnan, hakotev kol nechasav le'avdo yasav ben horin. So here, this is a document, a similar case. He says, all of my property I am giving to my slave. So that slave goes free because the slave is part of the property of the owner. And he said, all of my property is going free. That includes the slave and also all the rest of the property of the owner. However, shiyer karka kol shehu lo yasa ben horin. If, however, this is according to Tanakama, we're going to see as Rabbi Meir. We're assuming as Rabbi Meir, Stam Mishnah. So if he says, I'm giving everything, kol nechasav, I'm giving everything to my slave except for a certain part of my land, well then he is not emancipated. Because, you see, in this case, he says, all my property goes to my slave. He didn't say, my slave gets his freedom and all my property. He didn't say anything about the slave. So, if he says everything, well, everything includes all of his property, including his slave, then he gets it. But if he's holding something back, well, he's holding back some part of his land. Maybe he means to hold back also the slave. He didn't say explicitly that the slave goes free. And so maybe in his mind, he's holding back some things. He's holding back some land. He may very well be holding back the slave, and he wants to keep the slave. And therefore, the slave does not go free. And in fact, the slave would not get anything because a slave can't acquire his own personal property. And so, therefore, this would get nothing, according to Tanakama. Rabbi Shimon Omer le'olam hu ben horin ad sheyomar kol nechasai netunin lifloni abdi chutz mehad meribo shebahen. So Rabbi Shimon disagrees with Tanakama, and he says that the slave will go free. You see, the owner said, everything goes to my slave, except for a certain piece of land. Now, he doesn't specify which piece of land. This is a problem because then the owner could say, oh, I want that, I want this land, right? So the slave won't be able to get any land because for any piece, the owner could say, oh, that's the land that I wanted. Nevertheless, Rabbi Shimon says, even though he won't get any land, he does get himself because he only left out a piece of land, karka. He didn't, and a slave is not karka. A slave is a movable item. And therefore, he's saying, Rabbi Shimon splits the difference. And says the release applies to the slave, but does not apply to the land. So you see, Rabbi Shimon, palginan dibura, he's willing to apply the statement to the slave, even though not to the land. Whereas Rabbi Meir, the Tanakama, says, listen, if he writes everything to the slave, all fine, right? But if he's saying it in such a way that he's not going to get any land, then he doesn't get himself either. All or nothing, right? In this case, all. But shier karka, if he leaves off something over and he can't get any land, then nothing. He doesn't get himself either. So that would be similar to Abaye. Whereas Rava, who says we split the difference, that Rabbi Shimon follows that as well. Now, even Rabbi Shimon will agree in a case where he doesn't say karka, but rather I give everything to my slave except for 1/1000th of all my property. So now he's holding back something. He doesn't say I'm holding back some land. He's holding back something of my property. Well, a slave might be included in that something of a property, even though it only says 1/10,000th, and presumably the slave is worth more than 1/10,000th, unless the guy's very rich. Maybe he has more. But the point is, he's treating the slave like as if it's not worth. He's not worth a lot to him. The point is, since he's holding some amount back, he might be holding back the slave himself or property. We don't know. So Rabbi Shimon would agree if he's holding back an undisclosed item, a general category, then it could refer to the slave, and so therefore the slave does not get freedom. But if he says, I'm holding back some land, then we can say, oh, well, he's holding back some land, and we don't know which one it is, so no land transfers, but he himself is not land, and therefore that transfers. So we see Rava is following Rabbi Shimon that we can split the difference. Now, question: Rav Yosef bar Yomi amar Rav Nachman, afal b'shekiles Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Shimon halacha ke Rabbi Meir. Rav Nachman once said that even though Rabbi Yosef praised Rabbi Shimon, saying, Rabbi Shimon, I really like your opinion there that you said, Palginan Dibura, even though he had praise, nevertheless, bottom line, we follow Rabbi Meir in that Mishnah, that Tanakama, who says that it's all or nothing. And so therefore, how could Rava go ahead and say halacha is like Rabbi Shimon, follow Rabbi Shimon, when there's a principle that halacha is like Rabbi Meir here in this case? The Braita, where we see the praise, is that when this statement was said in front of Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yosef quoted the pasuk, right? Hashem kisses the lips that give the right answer. In other words, yes, you are right. This is okay. So, but nevertheless, halacha is like Rabbi Meir. So that's the challenge to Rava. How could he follow Rabbi Shimon? And now he's actually Rav Nachman himself has a contradiction. Now we are going to have to solve first. When we amar Rav Nachman hachiv, amar Rav Yosef ben Yomi, amar Rav Nachman. שכיב מרע שכתב כל נכסיו לעבדו ועמד חוזר בנכסיו ואינו חוזר בעבד. Rav Nachman is another ruling that says someone on his deathbed, the rule of someone on his deathbed is if he just says words, he says, I want to give this field to that person, this field to that person, even if he doesn't actually write it in a will, in a contract, his words are binding because it's on his deathbed, so we assume that he really means it. Now, let's say he says, all my property goes to my slave, but then he gets better. Well, the general law of a shchimera, who gets better, is that he keeps his fields because we assume he only wanted to give this field to that guy and this field to that guy because he was about to die, so he wants to give everything away. But if he gets better and he lives, and he wants to keep his fields and keep everything. If he gets better, then he takes all the sick person takes all his fields and all his stuff back, but not the slave. If he said, right, when he says this phrase, everything goes to my slave, so that means his slave is going free also. His slave goes free and he cannot take the slave back. Why? Regarding the property, this is a gift from a shchib mara, and that general rule is if someone's on deathbed, it only gets transfers if he dies. If he gets better, it doesn't transfer because that's what he had in mind. However, regarding a slave, once it's publicized that he is a free man, he's going out, everybody says, oh, he's a free man, then you can't make him a slave again, right? This doesn't work. Regarding to an item, a field, you could change the status. It has no feelings. But this is a person. He has feelings. People are going to treat him differently. And then that's it. Once he has a free status, you can't go back and enslave him, which is a nice rule. So the point here is that we see, according to Rav Nachman himself, what is he doing? He's splitting the difference. This Shechib Merah said, all my property goes to this slave. He didn't say two separate statements. My slave, you are free, and the property goes to you. It's all in one. All of my property, which includes his slave, goes to the slave. So he's granting his slave freedom. And yet, if we say all or nothing, then you'd have to say nothing because the property doesn't go, so the slave doesn't go either. But here Rav Nachman says we do split the difference, which shows that Rav Nachman himself is following Rabbi Shimon, even though he said over here, hold on, halacha is like Rabbi Meir. So first, tell me how to resolve Rav Nachman himself. Rather, in fact, Rav Nachman thinks that you can palginan dibura, we can split the difference. And the only reason why he said halacha is like Rabbi Meir in that original case is because there's a rule that a get, something that severs ownership of a woman, or not ownership, something that severs a marriage, or that in this case severs ownership of a slave, has to be something that fully severs it. There can't remain any connection. And in that case of Rabbi Meir, where he said halacha is like Rabbi Meir, so here he says, I'm holding back some land. I give you everything, but I'm holding something back. If he's holding something back, then it's not a full severance. Maybe he's holding back some of the ownership of the slave too. So his words are not sufficiently clear that he's making a severance and saying, yes, you get your freedom. And that's why, in that case, he agreed with Rabbi Meir. But in general, Rav Nachman would agree that you can palginan dibura, as he says in the case of Shechib Merah, and so that solves the problem for Rava, right? Because this ruling, the halakha is like Rabbi Meir, was only about this particular case, not about the general rule. So Rava can follow Rabbi Shimon in general. Okay. Im yesh alav orin itkayem bechotamav. This is now the last part of the Mishnah. This is the opening Mishnah of the Perek. We're going to conclude discussing it now. And we said there that if a get is brought within Eretz Yisrael, you don't have to say the formula befanai nichtav nichtam. However, if it is contested, then you're going to have to find the signatories or someone who knows them in order to ratify the signatures. Ad kama. So now we ask this: how many people are contesting the signatures? If it's only one person, it can't be, because Rabbi Yochanan says a contestation has to be at least two people, one person. We say, why should we trust one person? Okay, so two people come and say, this document is a forgery. But if it's two, then we have two against two. Two people say these are not, these signatures are forgeries. Two people say we recognize the signatures, they are correct. Well, it's two against two. Why should we believe one set of witnesses over the other? Right? Maybe rely on the witness, they say it's a forgery. Rather, it must be the husband himself. He comes and says, wait a second, I never divorced my wife. I didn't write that. Right? This is not correct. And so since he is one, it's true, but he's the husband himself. So he has claim to say this is false. If he does that, then we bring two, and two against one will win. And so that's the case we're talking about. All right, next Mishnah. Hamevi get midinat hayam ve'no yachol lomar befanai nichtam im yesh alav adim yitkayem bechotamav. Someone does bring a messenger brings a get from somewhere else, and he's supposed to say the formula, but he cannot say the formula. We already saw this Mishnah because he's deaf mute. If there are witnesses, so that's okay. He can ratify the witnesses. The whole point of the formula was to be an easier way to so you don't have to ratify it fully. But if you can't say the formula, then you do the full ratification. Echad gittin hashim v'echad shichrei abadim shehavu lemolich ulmevi vezo achat min haderachim sheshavu gittin hashim leshichrei avadim. And here's the Mishnah we already referenced previously that the same law is true for Gittin Hashim and for Giteh Shichrurei Avadim, to let a slave free. If someone travels with it, if someone is a messenger, bringing it either to Eretz Yisrael or from Eretz Yisrael to another land, they have to say, it's a good thing, they must say, Befanai nichtam, fanai nichtam, if they, and so that they won't have to have a problem of Yitkayem Bechotamav. And this is one way in which Gittin Hashim is the same as Giteh Shichrei Abadim. We're going to see more ways in that they are similar. Okay, Mai eno yachol omar. What does it mean he can't say it? If you say he's deaf, well, a deaf person can't be a messenger in the first place. Cheresh, which in those days they didn't know sign language, they didn't know how to teach people who were deaf, so didn't have full competence. Like a shoteh does not have full mental competence, or a minor who also cannot be held, is not responsible, does not have yet full mental competence, so they cannot be messengers. So he can't be a messenger in the first place. So it can't be talking about that case. Rav Yosef explains that he originally could hear, and the husband said, "Here, take this and give it to my wife." And he goes and he gives it to the wife. But then, just then, something happens, a loud boom occurs, and he goes deaf and can't speak anymore. And so he's not able to say the formula. That's what we're talking about. Might be an unusual case, but yeah, that's the case we're saying. So in that case, since he was a valid messenger, the get is valid, but he couldn't say the formula. All right, so then you have to find a way to ratify the signatures, even though it may be difficult because they're in a different country. In both types of Gittin, you have to say the formula when you're traveling from one country to another. The Mishnah mentioned that this is one way in which they're similar. Now we're going to bring a braita that says there are three ways they are similar. This is one of them. That's one of them. You have to say the formula if you're coming and going. Kuti is a Samaritan. Samaritans are the remnants of the northern 10 tribes, mixed in with other people that were moved in there. Generally, the Samaritans follow the Chumash, and the things that they follow rather strictly, a literal interpretation, but because they don't have the oral law, so they have very, very different interpretations. And so generally, they cannot be included in halacha. And in fact, it's questionable whether they are not actually Jewish. I mean, because they're from the northern 10 tribes, and Jewish means Yehudi is from Yehuda. The question is, are they from Bnei Israel? Are they within the Berit or not? So this is a big question, because genealogy, in terms of genealogically, probably most of them are. Some of them are brought in. There's a mixture. There's intermarriage, not clear. And other places we talk about, did they convert So the story in Sefer Melachim is that they were following Avodah Zarah up in the north, which they had been doing anyway, and especially when these foreigners came in with a mixture of population. So during Avodah Zarah, lions came and were threatening. They realized, oh, the God of this land requires us to be monotheistic, and so they brought in the Kohen to teach them Torah, and so this was a kind of a conversion, but the conversion was under duress because they were afraid of the lions. Is that a valid conversion or not is a mahloket. And so therefore some say they're Jewish, some say they are not Jewish, or they're Jewish partially for some things but not for other things. And so that's what we're talking about here. If a kuti, a Samaritan, signs a document, a legal document, it's no good except for Gittin Hashim and Shichrure Avadim. For this, we permit it, right? Maybe we want to go an extra mile because we really want to make sure that the woman is not an aguna. And let's say the husband, he doesn't want to give a get, but he's in the mood to give a get all of a sudden, and the only people are around are Samaritans. Okay, quick, sign it. Okay, we're going to give an extra leniency. We'll follow that opinion that says Samaritans are Jewish enough for this, and therefore we will permit using Samaritans for both. And this is a second way in which the two are similar. We also want to let the slave go free. That's also important. A slave going free, first of all, he gets his freedom, and that way he can go and marry. So it also helps this slave not be an agun, wouldn't be able to marry someone. Okay, so that's a leniency that applies only to these two and not to any other contracts. V'chol hashtarot העולים בערכאות של גויים, אף על פי שחותמיהם גויים כשרים, חוץ מגיטין נשים ושחררי עבדים. There's another way in which these two documents are actually more stringent than other documents, other financial documents that are written up in the Gentile court, all right, in a secular Roman court, wherever, even though the people that signed it are not Jewish, they are the document is valid because we say Dina de Malchuta, Dina, the law of the land is the law, and therefore, if we're in a non-Jewish court and right in the non-Jews there sign that says I owe you $100, then I have to give you $100 because right the law of the land we recognize. However, for get nashim shichure abadim, that is not true because Gittin Kiddushin is not something that is under the law of the land. That's particular to Jewish law, and so that only works if the signatories are Jewish, and the same thing is true for the shichure abadim. Now those are three ways according to Tanakama in which the two types of divorce documents are the same. According to the Meir, there's yet another way in which the two gitim are the same. Ha'omer ten get ze le'ishti, ushta shichrur ze le'abdi, rasa lachzor b'shnehem yachzor divrei Rabbi Meir. According to the Meir, if someone gives a document to a messenger and says, give this to my wife, right? Or he gives a messenger and says, give this to my slave, that he will go free. And then he changes his mind, right? He can go and stop the messenger and say, you know what? I changed my mind. I don't want to send the divorce paper. I don't want to send the freedom paper. So he can change his mind according to the Bimeir. So this is yet another way in which they are the same. However, only the Bimeir says this. The Rabbanan say there's a difference between the two. The difference is that in general we say zachin le'adam shelo befanav. We can give someone benefit even not in their presence. So I can pick up a watch from the street and say, who like this one? My cousin would really like this watch. I pick it up on his behalf. It belongs to him because we can assume that everyone would want to have this item. So when it comes to shichrur avadim, we assume everybody would want to be free. And therefore, once he gives the document over to the messenger, even though it doesn't actually take effect until the messenger delivers it, but theoretically, the messenger could also be a messenger of accepting and accept it on behalf of the slave. So, since that is true, and zachin adam shelo befanav, once he gives it over to the slave, it's irrevocable, right? It's as if he already gave it to a messenger for the slave, and so it's already given. and cannot be taken back. Whereas a divorce paper to a woman is not necessarily good. You have to ask her, do you want to get, maybe she does want to get, maybe she does not want to get divorced. And so you cannot apply zachin le'adam shelo befanav regarding a get isha, and therefore, according to Tanakama, according to the rest of the rabbis, a get that's given to a messenger can be revoked because it doesn't automatically happen. We don't assume that the messenger could receive it without the knowledge of the wife, because maybe it's not to her, maybe it's to her detriment. And so the other rabbis would disagree. Well, the Bimei says, no, in both cases, these are the same. And so that's why he adds a fourth item to the list. Good. Now, when this Baraita says there are three ways in which they're different. Now, why do you have to tell me there are three ways they are different, and then list the three ways? You could just say, just list them, and I can count by myself. 1, 2, 3. I see there's three ways. Why do you have to put the number on the top? So generally the number is coming to tell me these three and only these three. So that's to exclude the Bimeir, that the rabbis do not agree with the equation of the Bimeir. They think that they're different. So fine. But the Bimeir says, four, actually the Bimeir doesn't necessarily say those words. It's actually the narrator, right, saying, according to Bimeir, there would be four. So we're asking, according to the narrator, why is he saying that according to the Bimeir, there are four and only four ways? What other case might have I assumed would be the same? That Rabbi says, no, I disagree with that, and I think that they're different. So here's what Rabbi Meir and Rabbanan surely are going to exclude. Interesting case of witnesses that don't know how to sign their name. They don't know how to write. Many people in the olden days were illiterate. Probably most people were. And so they don't know how to sign their name. So what do? We can take a blank paper, tear it for them, make a stencil, right, like we used to do when we were kids, and you just fill in the stencil, which you don't even have to know how to write. You just, color all over the place, and then the signature comes out perfect. Then you remove the stencil, and you have a perfect signature. So we can do that for them and fill it in with ink. And that's fine. Amar Rabbi Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. באמת במאמרים בגיטין נשים, אבל שחרורי עבדים ושאר שטרות, אם יודעים לקרות ולחתום חותמין, באם לאו, and חותמין. Rashbag disagrees and says, that's only true for regarding a get, you can sign with using a stencil. But if regarding a document to free a slave or any other documents, if the witnesses know how to read and to sign, then they can sign. But if not, then they can't sign. Go find someone else who actually knows how to do that. Rashbag is giving this leniency only for Gittin Hashim. We don't want her to be an aguna. The husband, we convinced him now to give the get, so quickly get any two guys off the street and let them sign it, and even if they don't know how to sign. But for other things, go find a proper person to sign it properly. Okay, so that's why he says four. The Rabbi Meir says they're equivalent only in four things to show that Rabbi Meir disagrees. But with the Tanakama of this Baraita, the Tanakama of this Baraita would say there's a fifth way in which the Gittin are the same. Okay. Now, just a question on the language of this Baraita. Rabban Shimon says, when does that true Gittin? But if they don't, in other ones, if they don't know how to read or sign, who said anything about reading? The Tanakama says, if they don't know how to sign, we're just concerned. It doesn't matter if they know how to read or not. All we want to know is, do they know how to sign? Then use a stencil. So why is he saying it if they don't know how to read? And the answer is there's missing words here, and you have to read it saying as if it says, if the witnesses don't know how to read, well, they have to know what they're signing, so you have to read it to them, and then they say, now I know what's in the document, and then they can sign. And if they don't know how to sign either, it could be that they don't know how to read, but they do know how to sign, so if they don't know how to sign, also can't read and can't sign, then you read it for them and you make them a stencil. So that's what was Tanakama, and then Rabban Gamliel is following up. If they don't know how to read and sign, so that's why he mentioned those words, because the Tanakama also did in fact mention them. All right, now we see that there are 4 ways. Right, 3 ways according to Nakama, 4 ways according to Rabbi Meir, and there is a 5th way in this where similar, but the Rabbi Meir does not agree with them. So now we're going to ask Vetuleka, and that's it. It's only these ways. In the Mishnah, let's just go back to the 3. Right, these 3 ways that they are similar, and that's it. And now we're going to propose a few different ways in which also Gittin Nashim and Gittin Shechurei Avadim are similar and therefore should have been included in the list. Tenu get ze leishti ushtar shechrur ze leavdi umet lo yitenu leachar mita tenu mane lifloni umet yitenu leachar mita. If someone says, give this get to my wife, or he writes up a shtar to free his slave and he says, give this to my slave, but then while it's on the way, before it gets to the wife or the slave, the person dies. The messenger should not deliver it after the sender dies. Why? Well, if it's a get nashim, then the second he dies, they're already not married anymore, right? The death until death do us part. So there's no point in delivering a get, because it's not needed. Won't do anything. And for an eved, if he dies, well then, at that point, that slave goes to the inheritors. And so he is not going to be free. Maybe the inheritors don't want to free him. So it can only work while the sender is alive. So these are 2 cases where you do not fulfill his wishes. You cannot fulfill his wishes after he died. On the other hand, if he says, give this money to someone else and he dies, then you still continue to give it. This would be true in a case of Shchiv Mera. He is on his deathbed, and therefore we assume that what he says on his deathbed is very serious, as if it was written, and therefore we continue to give it. So here we have yet another similarity between the 2 types of Gittin. This should have been put on the list, right? You should, instead of 3, you should have written there's 4 ways in which they are similar. So we answer, Ki katane milata delete bishtarot, milta deishta bishtarot la katane. No, in that list, we're only putting items that are the same in Gittin Nashim and Gittin Avadim, but are different regarding other documents. But if it's the same law in these 2 Gittim and in other documents, then we're not including it. And this is true, this law is true regarding all documents, not only Gittin Nashim and Gittin Avadim. If he says send it and then he dies, you do not deliver it. That's also true regarding a financial document. If he writes a financial document and sends it and then dies, you also do not deliver it. So this law is the same in all 3. That's why we're not mentioning it. We only want to show the contrast that these 2 Gittim are the same in these laws, and they are different from financial laws. So how do we know that financial documents you do not send? Because Ravin, Teshalach Ravin Rishmed Rabbi Abhu, he said in the name of Rabbi Abhu from Eretz Israel, Hevuyodin Sheshalach Rabbi Elazar Lagolam Mishum Rabenu. Rabbi Elazar sent a message to Bavel in the name of Rabbeinu and Rabbi Yochanan. Shechim era shamar kitvut numane lefloni umet en kotvin venotnin. Someone on his deathbed said, write a document that will give a gift of 100 dinars to that person, and then he dies before it's delivered. We do not write it. We do not send it. Shema lo gama laknotel bishtar ve'enshtar achar meita, because we assume that he decided that it should be delivered only by a document and not by the special law of Shchiv Mera. So ironically, if he says it orally, which usually orally is less has less application, is less stringent. But nevertheless, here we have the rabbis have a special law that a Shchiv Mera who says something orally, we treat it with as a full declaration, as if it was written. And so if he said it, we would go ahead and do his words. But since he didn't say it orally, instead he said, go write it down, that shows that he probably wanted the gift to go ahead through the regular means of documents. And the law of a document is that it's only delivered if the sender is still alive. And so therefore he does not want it to go through if he died. And so therefore we do not send it. So you see, this is the same law in all 3, the Get Nashim, Get Avadim, and the financial document. All of them you do not send if the sender dies before it's delivered. And so we don't mention it here in the list. because in this is an example where all three are the same. We're only listing items where the two Gittim are the same but different from financial documents. Okay, v'ha'ika lishma. Hold on, you have the law that has to be written lishma. That's true for Gittin Hashim, has to be written for her. Gittin Avadim has to be written for that particular slave. And that's not true for financial documents. If I have a document that says a person's name on it and it says, you owe me this money, I already had it written before, I can use it for someone else with the same name. There's no law of lishma for financial documents, so you should have put that in. Now this bishlama l'Rabba hainu molicho mevi ela l'Rabba kashya. Now this is not a question according to Rabba, because Rabba says one of the items on the list, one of the three is molicho mevi. If someone is traveling with a document, he has to say b'fanai nichtam, because we have to ensure that it was written lishma. So the law of lishma is already embedded in the law of having to say the formula. But according to Rabba, who says no, you only have to say the formula to ratify the signatures, but not because of lishma. But Rava does know that the law of lishma is true, and it has to be written lishma. So according to Rava, that this should have been included as a fourth item in the list. And now we have another one, Vitu, ben Rava ha'ika mehobar. According to both of them, there's a special law regarding Gittin, Get Nashim, Get Avadim, that has to be written on something that is disconnected from the ground. If you write it on something like a leaf that's attached to the ground, then both Gittim are no good. And that's also not true of financial documents. You could write a financial document on something attached to the ground. So here is a law that should have been included in the list, and yet it's not. So how come you said 3 or 4 for the bima? It excludes all these others here, but there are plenty of others, right? Here's 2 more that we have should have been on the list. And so now we say, ki katane pisulat rabbanan deoraita la katane. In this list of 3 or 4, we're only including things that would be a problem midrabanan. If you don't say b'fanai nichtam, for example, then it's okay deoraita. It's only no good midrabanan. So that's why it's putting similarities that these are requirements for 2 Gittim. They're required Rabbanan on Doraita level. If you didn't have them, it's okay. But it's not counting things that would cause a problem in Doraita. And if you write something on a leaf that's attached to the ground, then that get is no good midoraita. And so that's why we're not including them. All right, so that answers those so far, but now we have another challenge. On the list of 3, the third item was if something is written and signed by non-Jews in non-Jewish court. And while for financial documents, that's okay. For Gittin Hashim and Gittin Avadim, that's no good, and that's no good mideoraita. The non-Jews have no law of Kiddushin and Gittin, and so they have no authority over that. And Gittin Avadim, we have a Gezerah Shavat similar to Gittin Hashim for this purpose, and therefore these are prohibited midoraita, and they are on the list. And you just said if it's doraita, it shouldn't be on the list. Vekatane. And so we answer for this one, the author of this baraita is actually talking about a case where it was delivered with Jewish witnesses, even though there are non-Jewish witnesses signed on it. And he is following the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, who says, this is a very important machloket throughout Gittin, right? Which of the witnesses are the main, the ones that actually effectuate the divorce? Is it the ones that sign on the document? According to Rabbi Elazar, no. You don't even need witnesses signed on the document. So it doesn't matter that they're signed by non-Jews. The ones that effectuate the divorce are the witnesses to the delivery of the get. And since the ones that the delivery of the get are Jewish, then they on the Doraita level, the divorce would be fine. So in the Mishnah, was talking about on the Drabanan level. On the Drabanan level, the rabbis are going to make a gezerah and say, listen, if you have non-Jews signed on the divorce paper and they signed it, then you're going to say, okay, now we're going to deliver it. We need witnesses. Oh, we'll use the same witnesses. And so it's very easy to use the same witnesses. witnesses, even though they can sign on it, but then they can't deliver it. So we make a gezerah. You know what? Don't let them sign on it, just in case they're going to come and also witness the delivery. And so therefore here also, yes, in the Mishnah is talking about a problem that is d'Rabbanan, and that's why it fits into the category in this baraita. It's talking only about the Rabbanan problems and not the Oraita problems. But now we say this itself does not work, because this is going to be a Mishnah we're going to see on Daf Bet of the next Amud. The Mishnah is says Tanakama says for Gittin you cannot have it signed by non-Jews. And on that Mishnah, there's another counter opinion. Rabbi Shimon Omer Af Elu Kesherin. He says it's fine to have non-Jews sign it. How come Rabbi Shimon says it's okay? Because he's agreeing with Rabbi Elazar that says that all you need is the witnesses for delivery to be Jewish. So since Rabbi Zera is explaining Rabbi Shimon's opinion to say Rabbi Shimon permits it, because he says it's the witnesses to the delivery that are the essential ones. That's why he permits it. Sounds like he's disagreeing with Tanakama, and Tanakama would not agree with Rabbi Elazar. Tanakama would say that you need the signatures on the get are the ones that are essential, and if they're not Jewish, it's a problem mid-deoraita. So it is a problem mid-deoraita, and therefore doesn't fit with the categorization on the list, that everything on the list is only a problem d'Rabbanan. So we answer, actually it could. It could be that Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon in the Mishnah on the next daf are both agree with Rabbi Elazar, and the author of our Baraita, the list of 3 and 4 things, is following Rabbi Elazar, and therefore on a Doraita level, the get is fine because there's 2 Jewish witnesses. It's only the ones that are signatories. And the difference between Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon in the next Mishnah is about a subcase of if you have names that are signed on it that are clearly not Jewish, right? It's signed by Jesus and Christopher. So anyone looking at it says, "Oh, I know these people are not Jewish," and no one will, according to Rabbi Shimon, no one will come to make a mistake and say, "Oh yeah, let them be witnesses to the delivery also." Nobody will do that because it's clear that they're not Jewish. And in that case, Rabbi Shimon says no need to make a gezerah, and Tanakama says, you know what, make a gezerah anyway. Who knows? That's the case where there's a question to make a gezerah or not. That's the machloket between them. But in fact, everyone would agree that on the Doraita level, it's a good get, and therefore it's only a problem in Rabbanan, and that's why it's included in our list of 3. Okay, good. We answered that, but now still another problem. Hazara deoraita v'ketani. A case of retraction, we talked about earlier, that this is the 4th item of Rabbi Meir. He says that a husband who sends a get nashim or shichur avadim with a messenger and then dies, we do not deliver it. And you may not deliver it, and that is a problem, a deoraita problem, and yet it's listed on the list. And you said that we're only listing the Rabbanan things. So you know what? We have to abandon that. Ela ki katane milata deleta b'kiddushin, milata deita b'kiddushin la katane. In fact, there are some Rabbanan, some deoraita on the list. And here's the thing: we only are listing items that are the same regarding get nashim and get avadim, but those 2 are different from kiddushin. If it's the same in all 3, get nashim, get avadim, and kiddushin, then we're not putting it on the list. And those other things like if someone does kiddushin, let's say with a shtar, right? Send this. You can do that. You could write a hayat mikudeshet li. You write it in a shtar. You can give it to the woman, or you can give it to a messenger. If the messenger goes and delivers it to the woman, he does not need to say befanai nichtab. So that's why that one makes sense that it is on the list. It applies to gitei nashim, gitei avadim. It does not apply to kiddushin, and so to the rest of them. Okay, so that's why it lists those 3 and 4, but not other things. Hold on. The law of retraction, the 4th one of Rabbi Meir, that does apply to Kiddushin. If someone writes a document, Hayat Mikudeshet, gives it to a messenger, and in the meantime he dies, the messenger should not deliver it. Who's she going to be married to? And so that's a law that's the same in all three. Why is that included on the list? And the answer is b'shlichut ba'al korcha de begerushin ita or bekiddushin leta, because there is a concept of sending a messenger that will do something against her will, and that does apply for get but does not apply for kiddushin. So there is a difference between them. So what is this concept? A get can technically be given by a man against, even if she says, I don't want to get divorced, he can deliver it to her and they will be divorced. Nowadays, we don't allow that. There's takana that the woman has to agree to it. In our ketuvot also it says he's not allowed to divorce her against her will. But technically, from the letter of the law, he can divorce her against her will. Therefore, he can also tell an agent, here, take this get and deliver it to my wife, even against her will. And in such a case, the husband would not be able to retract it, would not be able to change his mind, because she has no choice in the matter, and so it's going to go automatically, right? The same as zachin b'shelo b'fanav, the get is already delivered, irrevocable. Regarding get. Kiddushin, you can never do that. From the base letter of the law, a kiddushin has to be done with the woman's consent. No one can be forced to be married. And therefore, since it depends on her consent, so as long as the messenger is still on his way, it does not take effect, because who knows if she'll agree or not. So as long as it's not away, the husband can retract. Since there is a case where there would be a difference between Gittin and Kiddushin regarding retraction, therefore this can be put into the list where there is a similarity between get and between two types of Gittin, and is not true of Kiddushin. Now, even though in a typical case where someone is sending a get, and he's not doing it against her will. So send this get and give it to her, right? And, make sure that she agrees to receive it. In such a case, yes, then he could retract, and then the law would be the same for all three. Because it depends on her will, and therefore he can retract the whole time. But since there is a possible case in Gittin that is different from Kiddushin, so that is different enough that we say, you know what? Here's should be on the list of items that are similar for these two, but is different from Kiddushin, and therefore is worthy to be on the list. Okay, we're a lot of time spent on just figuring out this as 3 or 4 and not more, right? And maybe the 3 was just a nice heading to remember that there's 3. But I think nevertheless, this is a good exercise to think about other similar laws and try to decide, does it have the same outcome or not the same outcome? And so we learn a lot of other halachot by the way. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.